Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm good, Maggie. How are you?
Good. I'm just waiting another minute or so to officially kick off. Got a few more people joining.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and officially start the meeting. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie Green. I'm the Public Information Officer with KCMO Public Works. Thank you for joining us this evening for the St. John Avenue Traffic Calming Project. I do want to introduce, we have a few members of Public Works as well as a PIAC representative on the call this evening. So Mario, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. Yeah. Good evening. My name is Mario Vasquez. I'm a project manager in the Public Works Department.
Michael Shaw, Director of Public Works.
And Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jim Wanzer. I'm a PIAC representative for Catherine Shields, the 4th District at large.
And here in a little bit, we'll introduce the project team representative from the design team that's on the call. But I am going to go ahead and share my screen so we can pull up our slides. And it looks like we have a small group this evening, but we are recording the meeting that will be posted on the project website after we're done within the next few days. So this can be shared with neighbors, business owners that weren't able to make it this evening. So give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen, my shared screen. Okay, excellent. So what we're going to go through this evening, I'll just cover some housekeeping items, which is standard protocol these days in the world of virtual meetings. We'll talk through some of the meeting goals, give a background of the project. I know this is our second public meeting, but we will kind of give an overview of sort of the scope of the project. And then we'll kick it over to our designer, Christopher Kenzel with HDR, to kind of talk about some of the recommendations for the project, and then have sort of a facilitated discussion, question and answer session, so that we can hear what you all think about the recommendations for moving forward. And then Mario, before I kick it over to you really quick, we just asked for folks to stay muted unless you're called on to speak. As I mentioned, we are recording the meeting, and I'll be sure to put this up on the project website via the city's YouTube page here in the next few days. We do have a small group, so we can have ample time for question and answer, but if you do have questions or thoughts you want to pop in the chat box, as we're going on, please feel free to utilize that tool to put any comments or questions in there. We will wrap up at 7. If we're done a little bit before, then we may conclude a little early. So if, and again, if you have any ongoing questions or concerns, Mario and my contact information is on this slide, and then we'll have it available at the end as well. So Mario, with that, I will kick it over to you to kind of get us going on the project side of things.
Sure. Thank you, Maggie. So good evening, everyone. As I said, as Maggie said, this is the second public meeting for this project. Just a brief background on it. This project was funded by District 4 PIAC funds that was looking at implement traffic calming measures at 5 intersections. And I think after discussion with the neighborhood, the scope of the project was expanded to include, a mile long the project length of the project from Elmwood to Belmont. So the city has brought on board HDR Engineering to conduct some, basic traffic evaluation, safety, speeding, volumes, those kinds of typical traffic issues. We held a meeting back in December December 17th, I believe. And at that time, we presented some preliminary findings of the study of, dealing with what are the typical crash sites and trouble areas. At that time, we also gathered some input from you to see what your perceptions of the corridor were and see how those were matching up with the reality that we're finding on the ground. And so today's meeting is really about going over some of the recommendations that the design firm HDR Engineering has developed based on both the data that was collected during the public meetings and also as part of our regular data collection process. Also, our objective for today then is to begin to discuss, what happens next. So what we want to do today in essence is review recommendations, gather your feedback a little bit on what about those recommendations, and then begin to discuss next steps. So I think with that behind us, and if there are any questions about the background of the project, I'm going to turn over to Christopher Kinzel from HDR to begin to talk about the findings and recommendations of the project.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Okay. I'm, let's see. I'm going to, Maggie, do I need to talk about these slides, or I'm just going to share my screen, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to stop screen sharing and kick it over to you.
Okay. So I will pull this up and make sure I can you see my screen, Maggie? You're my test. Yes?
Get in there.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So just a brief sort of transition from our last meeting to this meeting. When at our last meeting, we presented some ideas of the kinds of treatments that could be used on this corridor. We kind of also talked about those in line with the budget that has been allocated for this, and so what essentially if we were going to do some of the specialized treatments at the intersections that had been discussed, like doing speed tables or speed humps and sort of more higher cost treatments, we were only going to be able to focus on a few locations throughout the corridor. And what we heard pretty loud and clear in that public meeting was that is there a way to look for some lower cost treatments that can be spread throughout the corridor, fitting within this overall budget that the PIAC request represents, and spread those traffic calming benefits throughout the corridor, which is a very good strategy, because placing one treatment here or there along a mile-long segment will calm traffic near those treatments, but having a more systemic pattern of treatments along the corridor is really going to help keep speeds down throughout the corridor. So I'm going to be showing you a map in a second, but I've got this little legend up here on the screen at the moment. And I just wanted to kind of talk in broad generalities about what the plan you're going to see is. And the main feature of the plan is bump outs at many of the intersections along the corridor. And you'll see spaced every couple of blocks to really kind of narrow the street at the intersections. And I'll zoom in a little bit here. On the map, they'll look like these little red things, but the general idea is these kind of little parking block structures and then and delineation. What this does, again, these are a low-cost solution, so it's maybe only less than $3,000 a corner, and that what we can do then is spread that throughout the entire project. These also are designed to allow drainage to work and things like that. They narrow the street, so they promote slower traffic, slower speeds, but they also narrow the pedestrian crossing, so pedestrians can cross at a narrower, safer spot. And then the other treatment we have is, as everyone knows, along this corridor, there's a lot of on-street parking, and we're strategically showing planter boxes. Now, again, this may not be exactly what they look like, but this is the general idea of having planter boxes along the corridor, strategically spaced as well, for sort of in between these locations where we have bump outs. So they would essentially take up a little bit of the parking, but we've kind of strategically placed them so they're not they're attempting not to be in key locations where the parking demand is high. And so again, those narrow the street. They provide sort of a vertical barrier and give drivers a feeling that they need to drive a bit slower. There's a couple other places where, and pink is not necessarily the color we've chosen, but we've shown some off-street vertical elements. This one shows a picture in the street, but some kind of vertical elements, because in several places along the corridor, especially right in front of the park, there are bump outs already, but they're just curb bump outs, and there's not really a vertical element to them. So we're suggesting putting some vertical elements, such as small planter boxes, in those areas, again, to sort of reinforce those bump outs. We're showing restriping the whole corridor, and you'll see that in a second. That'll include high visibility crosswalks of the variety you're seeing here. And then there are a couple other features that I'll be pointing out. One place where we're showing the LED powered stop signs. So there's some places where there's four-way stops, and there's and no flashing red lights or anything. And so these are a cost-effective solution that will make those stops a little more visible. And so I'll show you where that is. We're adding more speed limits throughout the corridor, speed limit signs, I'm sorry. And then also in a couple strategic spots along the corridor, we're going to put in these, we're recommending these solar powered signs that give you feedback on your speed. So, and they flash if you're going above the speed limit and that sort of thing. I'm sure people are generally familiar with those. So I'm going to flip to the map here. And what I'll do is we've divided the corridor up into 4 pieces. And probably after each piece, I'll stop for a second and Maggie might help me, because she's better at facilitating the communication, but she might help folks jump in if there are questions. She'll let us know if there have been questions in the chat box, but there'll be a little bit of opportunity there. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'll zoom in on various spots so we can roll down the corridor. But this section here is from Elmwood to Brighton. So we're going to start at the west end of the corridor and move east. So that'll be left to right on your screen. These little arrows show where there's one-way streets. The blue Bs show where there are bus stops. Some of these dimensions show proposed widths of lanes. And you can see we've got proposed striping. And then we have these little balloons here that show some information, like this. The intersection of Elmwood was the subject of the PIAC request, was one of the intersections talked about in the request. So we're just highlighting the specific locations. Again, we've sort of expanded beyond that based on the feedback we got. And then there's some other findings that we wanted to point out, like here at Elmwood, this is a pedestrian crash location. So again, we're showing bump outs on all 4 corners, a high visibility crosswalk. This will make, this is a signalized intersection, but this will also make the pedestrian crossing distances shorter. And again, when the light is green, obviously it will help cut down on the speeding. We're also showing here a speed limit sign. You'll see here throughout, we're kind of reserving some bus pullout areas. And in general, we're narrowing the lanes of the street with striping and trying to, by narrowing the lanes down to 11 feet, and that's really the narrowest we can get them, because KCATA runs buses down this corridor, and 11 feet is the narrowest that makes sense. So what we've done is kept for them. So we've kept the through lanes at 11 feet, narrowed, which is narrower than what's out there today, narrowed the turn lanes to 10 feet, and then taken up the rest with parking that's striped out and delineated. And in some of these parking zones, as I mentioned, there are planter boxes proposed and things, so that really we're trying to reinforce this narrower width of the road. So you can see through here, we've got the parking width kind of varies so that we can keep, because the street width varies, but this helps us keep the paved width of delineated lanes widths straight, or narrow. But we're allowing, we're continuing to provide parking all along the street where it is today. In the bus zones, we're striping those out so that the buses can make their stops. We are coordinating with ATA they're going through their system right now, and so we'll make sure that if they make any changes, that we're reflecting we're reflecting any of those changes. Moving down to lawn here, this was a bike crash location. So again, by keeping this narrow, we're promoting lower speeds. We'll also be better promoting bike travel if cyclists want to continue to use the street. And then moving down to Elmwood, we're showing the bump outs and the crosswalk. I'm sorry, this is Van Brunt, excuse me. And Van Brunt is really the widest street, being a boulevard, it's the widest street along the corridor in terms of cross streets. So we need a little more, we'll be able to bump out a little bit more and really provide some narrowing benefits here. This is the four-way stop, and this is where we're showing those solar flashing stop signs. So they're, as you saw in the picture, they're ringed around the edge with flashing red lights that are solar powered, and so they flash and are really sort of eye-catching. So this is a location where there have been more crashes along the corridor, and so we really want to give folks the advance warning that they need to be stopping. And this is here, just as we get east of Van Brunt, is our first location where we're showing a planter box. So we're trying to intersperse those between these bump outs. So here's one on the south side of the street. Here's one on the north side of the street. That reinforces those parking areas, that reinforces those narrower travel lanes. And then a speed limit sign here as we get to the end of this little tile. So I'm going to walk through 3 more of these this way, but I guess, Maggie, did you want to see if there are any questions at this time?
Yeah, so we've got a few general questions that I think we'll wait till the end to address, but it does look like we've got a couple specific questions about this section. So Amanda in the chat is asking about the intersection of St. John and Elmwood and wanting to make sure that the left turn arrow is pointing the right direction with the one-way on Elmwood. So yeah,
we've heard. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think it might just be an error on the arrows here where we're.
Oh, okay.
We're showing the left turn lane into.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, this concept needs to, there needs to be a slight revision here because there should be no left turns. You're correct onto Elmwood. So we'll make that correction.
And then how would that change the configuration there of the lane?
We would probably stripe out the center and just show it as a double yellow. So it would take up the same width.
Okay. And then on the other end of this tile back at Van Brunt, Amanda wants to confirm how many actual lanes are at Van Brunt.
On Van Brunt, there will be 1 lane in each direction. And like there is today, and it kind of narrows down, but we're necking it down there. And then on St. John, there will be a 1 through lane in each direction, and then a turn lane, a left turn lane, like there is today.
Awesome. It does look like someone has their hand raised for this section. So real quick, I believe it's Scott. If you do have a question about this particular section before we move on, feel free to raise your hand or type your question in the chat. Again, all general questions, and we'll have plenty of time for additional questions when we get to the end. But if you did have something specific to this particular section, we can address that now. So Scott, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and there you go.
Yeah, thanks. And I apologize. I'm on my phone and I can't access the chat. The question is on Van Brunt. Since that is a boulevard, has the team talked to the Parks Department related to the treatment there, just to be sure that they're aware and have either blessed it or made some commentary toward it? Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Scott. This is Mario. Yes, we have shared these concepts with the Parks Department staff. And as of right now, we haven't received an approval, but they are aware of the items that are being proposed. And so, yeah, we'll expect to continue to have discussions with them as we try to advance the project forward.
Okay, well, I have Park Board Tuesday, so I'm happy to relay the message.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or thoughts about this initial section from Elmwood to Brighton? All right, Christopher, I think you can move on to the next section.
Great. We'll move. This next section goes from Brighton to Hardesty. So this is in front of the park, as you can see. If I zoom in on Brighton, this is a symbol for an existing speed limit sign that's out there. We're also showing a speed limit, a new speed limit sign in the other direction. And again, we're kind of showing speed limits every quarter mile or so to keep people remembering these things. You'll see through the park here, these green boxes are the ones where I was talking about that we would put on the existing bump outs, so to help give them a little bit more verticality to them. So we're showing a few of those here. Obviously, we're gonna have to be careful in the design to make sure we're not obscuring sight distance around the corners and things like that. But again, just having something on those bump outs that gives the driver a little bit more of what we call an optical narrowing feeling, that just makes the road feel narrower. We also have a planter box here strategically as well in the parking area. And then at Quincy, we are showing bump outs on the two corners that are there. There's already a bump out on the south side. It's a T intersection, but then also a vertical element there to continue to reinforce that optical narrowing. Sorry to use a geeky term. We're doing the same thing down at Denver. So we're keeping these 11-foot lanes, sort of varying the parking width as needed to keep the lanes narrow. Crosswalk at Denver, some of these vertical elements on the existing bump outs. As we move further down from Denver, we're showing a planter box on each side, kind of, again, trying to strategically locate them so they're not blocking key high demand parking areas. And then we get to Hardesty, which is an area that people have been really concerned about because it's sort of the top of the hill, especially as you're heading eastbound. You start to go down the hill. So when I get to the next tile, you'll see we've actually done a special treatment to try to continue to discourage people from speeding down the hill. We're showing a speed limit here for the sign for the eastbound direction, a planter box right near the intersection, and then the bump outs and the high visibility crosswalks there at Hardesty. And as we head down the hill, you'll see there's some additional treatments, but that's on the next tile. So I'll pause here real quick to see if, or for as long as we need, see if people have comments.
Sure. Jim, I think we'll get to your question at the end since it's a little bit more of a general question, and we did anticipate that one. I think specific to this section, Abby Hoover is asking about if the crosswalks are going to be raised or will there be any signs or flashing lights for them by Holy Cross?
At the moment, our plan is not to raise them, or again, that's we're to spread the treatments out. We're not showing raised crosswalks here because of the expense in these locations, but they will be high visibility painted crosswalks. So no additional flashing lights are proposed at this time.
Any other questions or comments specific to this section?
Well, just to clarify that a little bit, though, I think, and this is Mario Vasquez speaking. I think when we're talking about flashing lights, I mean, we're thinking that we're not going to provide things like an overhead or mast arm type signalization, but each crosswalk will be appropriately marked, per MUTCD guidelines. So there will be signage to indicate the crosswalk, but there's just not going to be any high any of the what I would call what we call the hawk signals and things of that nature. Those are the ones that flash in the middle of the intersection. Those are rather pricey. So we're not, and I don't think those will be necessary, but we'll for sure have the appropriate signage for the intersections.
Thanks for that clarification, Mario. All right, Maggie, should I move on?
Yes, I do see that Amanda's typing, but I will circle back to the, oh wait, she just said something.
Okay.
Oh, wait, we can address Amanda. We'll address that at the end here. So go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we continue down, so this section is from Hardesty to Topping. And as we head down the hill from Hardesty, as things start to pick up, we're showing one of the flashing your speed sign to not only give people the speed limit, but to flash back at them, what speed they're traveling at, which is a pretty effective method for getting people to slow. We've also got planter boxes here to narrow the street again, and down to those 11-foot, and on the sides of the streets to reinforce those narrower lanes. And then as we get to Drury, we're showing again the bump outs to narrow, and then the crosswalks, as Mario mentioned, with appropriate signing, and then the same thing as we get down to Oakley. Now, there is an existing crossing on Oakley in front of the church, and our proposal here, we've got to really keep this section slow. We've now got bump outs at 2 adjacent intersections, and our proposal would be that people would cross the corner here, so that we, instead of having a mid-block crossing, we have an intersection crossing. And then also, again, in front of the church area, and then on the other side, providing these planter boxes to continue to narrow the street. As we go down past Lawndale, we've got another planter box, and then when we get to Topping, we're showing bump outs there, and also crosswalks and a speed limit sign. I think the other electronic speed limit sign will be on the last section, where it's a little bit flatter. Obviously, here we're in this direction where Hardesty is going down. You're going downhill from Hardesty, going east. Obviously, going uphill or going west, it's uphill, and so we've tried to position that speed limit sign on a flatter spot where it might control speeds a little bit. Be a better spot for controlling speeds in the westbound direction. So that is the third section. Maggie, any questions on this one?
I am acknowledging several that are coming in that are a little more general, so I am gonna try to wait for those till the end. Anything specific about this section that Christopher just covered, or any additional clarification needed? Scott, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thanks. That mid-block crosswalk is for Calvary Church.
Yes.
And that is primarily because across the street is also their parking lot.
Correct.
A couple of their buildings. So I raise that just to ask if there has been that conversation with Pastor Wendell over there. And if not, I think he's on the distribution list for all of this. But I just want to raise that's why it's there, and that a conversation with the church is probably warranted to deal with that issue. And I'll mute myself. Thanks.
Yeah, Maggie or Mario can respond. I'm not aware of conversations with the pastor, but maybe I don't know if Maggie or Mario, you are.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that we can definitely reach out before we propose that change, because I think they probably utilize that more often and frequently than the actual intersection. So definitely wrote that down to do a follow-up directly with them.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think the hope was, and we could certainly have that follow-up. The hope was it's we're looking definitely. I mean, it's a little bit out of the way for a pedestrian to make that crossing, but not hugely out of the way. So we were hoping that consolidating at the intersection helps make the intersection safer and gives them a safer place to cross where they might be more expected. But it's certainly a conversation I think worth having. So, Maggie, any other comments on this section?
Not so far. So let's do the last section and then we will circle back to more general questions.
Okay.
There was a question about the speed limit. I'm not sure if the speed limit will change by the school, or if it'll remain the same. And, I think at this time, we're not proposing any changes to speed limits, but the speed limit at the school should still be 25 miles an hour. But what we intend to do is to do a post-installation evaluation to make sure that, these treatments are being effective. And our goal is really to bring the speed limit, the observed speeds to, roughly around 30 miles an hour. So that's an appropriate speed limit.
Thanks, Mario. So this last section is topping to Belmont. And so again, at the beginning of the section, eastbound, we've got a speed limit sign. Westbound, you can see here we've got a planter box carrying the theme through here. And then at Bel Air, we're putting in we're showing the bulb outs, and then also at White, and it's just sort of in some of these places it's a question of trying to where you can put these things and where they'll work and how you can balance them with the planter boxes. So in this case they end up close to each other, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So we have two narrowed intersections, White and I said Belmont, but I meant White and Bel Air are also narrowed. And then as you get past White, this is where we have in the westbound direction the flashing speed sign. So it's kind of as you're entering, sort of entering the area that you see this flashing speed sign. And then we have some more planter boxes between White and Wheeling, and then from Wheeling to Belmont. At Belmont, we have the bulb outs and crosswalks, and then a speed limit sign right sort of the beginning of this section to again reinforce to folks the speeds through this area. So as you can see, it's a fairly consistent pattern of bulb outs and narrowing and striping and planter boxes to really narrow the street, give folks the perception of a narrow street. And this is something that cities across the country, this is the kind of technique they're using, these kind of low-cost treatments that can really be spread across a corridor. And Mario can attest the city's been using this as well, and it is a really good way to spread dollars and to provide those benefits. So, any questions, Maggie, on this last section?
One question that came through, what about planter boxes directly in front of some of the businesses like the ice cream shop and taco places? And so, Christopher, I don't know if there's a direct translation in outreach and where the planter boxes are placed along the corridor, or sort of what criteria you use to decide where they go along the corridor.
Yeah, that's a great question, and keep in mind this is a concept for folks listening, and so we're still, when we get into design, the actual locations could shift a little bit. We were pretty strategic, and we tried to pick the first criteria in placing the planter box was, if there's a parking lot right next to it, and so on street parking may not be as much at a premium, or and typically we tried to place it at locations where either there's already a lot of parking available along that section of street, so having the planter boxes there would not be an issue. Those are really the two big things: is sort of where there's an adjacent off-street parking, or where there's a lot of on-street parking, so that we're not taking away as a percentage, sort of a large piece of the parking. But and we did look pretty carefully at those locations and tried to be strategic about it. But that's why we're having this conversation as well. As we certainly welcome folks' input and feedback on this.
And I do kind of just want to reiterate for everybody that at our first public meeting in December, we did hear sort of loud and clear from the folks on that meeting and some subsequent meetings that we had that sort of this emphasis on spreading out the funding sort of more corridor wide instead of doing less treatments or less, improvements at less locations. And so, we did work with the design team and thanks to HDR for kind of running with that concept so that we can make sure that we're using the funding as far and as at many locations as possible. So I did just kind of want to reemphasize that point that the feedback was very helpful at the last meeting and kind of informing the direction that we headed here. So with that, I don't know, Mario, do you have any sort of high level thoughts before we dive into some of the questions?
Yeah, I think, the key thing is, again, there's a couple of questions about, the cost of the project and what it takes. In reality, I mean, $500,000 over 1 mile, it sounds like a lot, but it doesn't go too far. And so I think what we have tried to do here is, come up with ideas that can be implemented throughout, so that as Chris mentioned earlier in the meeting, the benefit can be felt throughout, so that we can see an improvement to traffic safety along the corridor. I think we definitely want to continue to work with the neighborhood to come up with a way to implement improvements long term. And I think this kind of goes now back to some of the questions about coordinating with resurfacing, and at what point do these cease to be sort of low cost treatments and they become more permanent treatments. That's part of the discussion that we need to have with the neighborhood long term. But I think our initial run at this is to implement something that can be low cost and throughout the and implement throughout the neighborhood. Trying to think what other thoughts are out there. So I guess that's kind of my kind of summarizing what Chris has shown to you today is how do we spread the money throughout, and I think that's what we have attempted to do today.
And Mario, I am sharing my screen with the next steps if you wanted to kind of just go through those really quick, and then we'll turn it over to sort of the question answer. Sure,
absolutely. And following today's meeting, obviously we're going to incorporate all your feedback into any additional recommendations that we might include in a final report. So aside, once we complete this process, our next steps are to go ahead and put together, call them construction plans. They're more than likely more like a pavement marking type plan. They're not terribly complex, but it is something that needs to be provided to a construction contractor to be able to lay this out properly and install. We also want to coordinate with street resurfacing. We took a quick look at the condition of the pavement through here, and I don't know how to say this any without sounding too blunt, but the reality is that the condition of this pavement is poor. And it is so poor that actually it is not a good candidate for resurfacing. It is a street that needs to be reconstructed. It is, we have a rating on pavements, and it is not at that point. But that also lends an opportunity to begin to think about future long-term improvements to the corridor, permanent improvements to the corridor, in conjunction that can be completed in conjunction with the reconstruction of the roadway. So it's not something, and reconstruction is something that's not going to happen in the next 5 years. It's something that we need to begin to advocate for. Though now, if we want it to happen within the next 10 years. If now having said that, we do have the funds to implement what we think are low cost and effective treatments along the corridor. And so these are things that if we get a agreement and approval upon, we can go ahead and get laid out and probably installed by the end of, maybe by the end of this calendar year. And last but not least, there's some things that we may hold back a little bit and before we're going forward, because before we're fully implementing, for example, and Chris, do you mind sharing your maps real quick? Just, I want to make a distinction between the types of pavement markings.
Sure, hold on.
Yeah.
Let me get back to that. Yes.
Just zoom in on any of the panels and that'll be okay. So, I mean, if you can appreciate in this panel, I mean, you can see some markings that are sort of long and linear. And those long markings, are probably the double yellow, for example. Those are ones that I would maybe hold off on, or just because those are better done with better asphalt or newer with a better surface. But the crosswalks, what I would call the short markings, those would probably be the ones that I would want to implement immediately, because I think those are the ones that we really are needing to improve the project and improve the corridor. So when we talk about coming up with a long-term and versus short-term type improvements, I think that's kind of what we mean. Saying like, well, we'll do the short markings immediately, but maybe hold off on the long markings is kind of what I'm thinking. Did I miss anything, guys? I don't think I did.
I don't think so. And we do have about 15 minutes left to kind of dive into some of the great comments and questions that have been put in the chat. So starting with Christopher Morales, asked about the 3D painting. And by that, I think you might be talking about like the artistic design and painting the pavement and some of the bump out areas. And I can speak a little bit to that as far as I will let Mario verify. I do not believe that it's in the scope of the project to actually do painting within those bump out areas for this particular project. However, we are still sort of finalizing and getting very close to being finished with our paint the pavement policy. That will be a very good complement for the neighborhood or area businesses or the schools in the area to utilize that program and sort of paint, and do artistic designs in the space that will be created through these bump outs. So Mario, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, or Director Shaw in regards to using the Paint the Pavement program sort of in coordination with this project.
Well, I think maybe one thing we haven't shared, and Christopher, share with us, if you don't mind, what you think the preliminary cost estimate would be to implement everything as you have presented. And so go ahead.
Yeah, we're for the actual construction costs, not including engineering costs, but we're probably just shy of 400,000.
Okay. And so I think as far as maybe doing paint the pavement type integration, I think there is opportunity, not a lot of room, but there is some room to be able to work with neighborhood groups to do maybe some specialized treatments at certain intersections that incorporate maybe some artwork, maybe some school project, maybe like that could be we could participate in something like that through a cooperative agreement with an entity that sponsors arts that is located in the area, or some other entity as well. But so there is okay. All right, so this is really an actual treatment of the okay, so I'm reading Christopher Morales' question, and the 3D painting question really refers to the optical illusion of giving a raised or having some kind of raised element on the of the crosswalk itself. So we haven't really explored that. And I'm familiar with what you're talking about. There we go.
Here's
There
a
it is.
picture of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Thank
it's
you for
possible.
clarifying.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility of doing that. I mean, I don't think it's it would be out of the ordinary. We would want to make sure that these are compliant with MUTCD, and that's the that would be the biggest thing. And but that's something that we can check as we're going through the design process.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, I'm sorry, Director Shaw, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to echo what Mario said. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, actually, that raised sidewalk illusion is pretty neat. I was actually kind of impressed with that. But I think all things should be taken into context as the project is being done. And so I think it should be addressed at that time.
Next question that's up that we haven't really dove into yet is how the planter boxes will be maintained.
That's a great question. It was posed to me, and in a lot of the neighborhoods where we have done these kinds of projects, what we have done is entered into maintenance agreements where we're basically, the city basically takes care of all of the hard infrastructure, the signs, the painting, the delineators, things of that nature. I mean, we will provide the planners, but then the neighborhoods participate in taking care of the landscaping and things of that nature, because our staff is just not we're just not staffed up to do that kind of work. But I think we've done those kinds of agreements with a lot of neighborhoods where sort of the more intensive maintenance that landscaping requires is done by neighborhood groups or business groups.
Awesome. So a question about the budget. So I know, Christopher, you outlined some of the costs, and it sounds like there's not a lot of room to maybe consider raised crosswalks. I guess, Mario, there's just a kind of a comment about wanting to look into that possibility of actually doing raised crosswalks. And I didn't know, Mario, if you could share a little bit about how much those cost. I know that you've done one or two of those projects in other neighborhoods.
Yeah. So, as mentioned at the beginning, the project is funded through PIAC, $500,000. I think to date, we've spent or committed about $30,000. So we have $470,000 sort of in the bank to do work. A raised crosswalk, which it can range in cost anywhere from $30,000 and up to probably $75,000 to $80,000 when we're doing with concrete, and that's just one corner of one intersection, right? A raised intersection where we would bring up the entire intersection up, that has a cost of anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000. So if we begin to implement some of those treatments, we pretty quickly run out of money. And so now, having said all that, I'd want to dovetail that comment by, again, reminding folks of the condition of this pavement and the fact that this roadway is at a point that needs to be reconstructed. And so the time to really be thinking about raised elements and raised treatments is when when we make a push for reconstruction of St. John Avenue, especially the section that we're talking about, and which is the section that we looked at the condition of the pavement of. To give you an idea of where it's at, if I were to, if I were to give it a grade, the pavement a grade, or rank it from I just tell you from 1 to 100, it's ranging about 36, and that's just a really bad. That's a point where it's almost a point of no return, where your only option is to reconstruct the roadway. So, I would maybe encourage folks to think about pushing for the reconstruction of the roadway, and at that time, begin to add some of those more expensive treatments, the raised crosswalks, raised intersections, because when they are combined with a bigger project with a larger scope of work, the actual cost of those items kind of goes down. It gets diluted into everything else that's going on with the street. So just something to think about.
Thanks, Mario. Couple great comments I just want to throw out about those planter boxes, and as far as coordinating with businesses on whether or not they want them or don't want them in front of their businesses, as well as keeping in mind delivery services, delivery trucks navigating to the businesses. So just wanted to acknowledge those two comments and make sure that you knew that we have taken those into account. Next question, kind of scrolling through, so I think we've addressed several of these. Abby Hoover asked, will the city or RIDE KC be contributing any additional funds for regular infrastructure maintenance in conjunction with this project? I think we've kind of touched a little bit on that, but maybe not directly. So Mario, I'm not sure if you want to address that one.
Well, touch upon RIDE KC for a second. I mean, right now, RIDE KC is going through a process of evaluating their stops. And some of their stops we've shown where they are today, and some of those might be changing. And so when they go to make some of the improvements to their, to the new stops, and we don't know exactly what they are because they're still in that process, but they will make an investment to the corridor so that their stops are visible and accessible, and located in places that are optimal for their services. So, so that's what I can say about RIDE KC. As with respect to the city, I mean, we've already committed. I wouldn't say we, but our city council through PIAC has committed, $500,000 to our city funds. Of course, if there are opportunities to leverage some of that money with either federal funding that may become available, we will do so. But at the present time, I think this would be the extent of the funding that has been allocated. And I think if we have a shortage that is not in a magnitude of the billions, I think it's always possible to pursue some additional funding. So I think, if we're short maybe $50, $75, $100,000, or if there's something that needs phasing over a number of years, that's something that our council is always open to continue to provide through continuing funding memos. But I do want to emphasize that PIAC funding is very competitive. There, and Mr. Wanzer is on the line. He's one of your PIAC reps, and our PIAC members receive probably, I don't know, it seems to me like maybe 300 applications per cycle, and that's just, there's just not enough money to address all of those needs. So
let's see, trying to sort through comments versus questions. Someone is asking, since the lanes will be reduced in width, will semi-trucks be restricted from traveling on St. John?
No, I think the 11-foot width that is being proposed is a pretty standard width for urban streets. So and those are still pretty navigable by semi-trucks. So no, we would not be restricting truck traffic.
And then several sort of comments and just general sentiment about the planters and the ability to maintain them. Mario, I'm just wondering if you can speak at all to, it's likely that we would have sort of a maintenance agreement in place before we would install them, right? Like we're not necessarily going to put them out there without having a plan in place, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think we would have to identify a party that is willing to serve as contractor, if you will, with us, that we can, call upon when to assume responsibility for maintenance of the planters. So yeah, we would not be installing anything until we get those agreements in place. But that's one of the things about this project, about the way that the project is being presented to you all as a kind of as a collection of low cost treatments that any of these can be rolled out at any time. So if it takes us a while to develop a maintenance program, we'll probably hold off on the planners. But the the bulb outs, delineators, striping, all those things are going to be done by us, and they can be done once we have agreement from the community that that's the direction we want to move.
Sort of along those lines, a question about, with the amount of speeding and racing, is what we're proposing actually going to change anything? So Mario, can you talk about sort of the discussions that we've had about post data collection and sort of the idea that we would roll some of these out and then go back and kind of take a look at the speeds and make sure that further, adjustments were not needed. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what we've talked about there? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So we've done a similar study to this one over in the Boca neighborhood where, we evaluated 39th Street and we set aside some money to see how effective our measures are, our speed control measures are, and really what it amounts to just conducting a speed study after the fact. And the speed study is something that's done, over a number of days just to evaluate how many cars are going and how fast they're going. And I think we've done a as part of the project, we kind of did a study of speed at this point. And Christopher, remind me, I think we're looking at what, 38 miles an hour is the typical speed on the corridor?
Or higher. I mean, it gets up near 40, and obviously that's sort of the 85th percentile as we measure it. Right. So there are definitely people speeding a lot faster than that as well.
Right. So I think, what we want to get to is to a point where these elements can achieve a reduction of, somewhere, get us down to about 29, 30 miles an hour. And that would be a success. I mean, I think that would be a good indicator and a good speed limit for an urban street such as St. John, which is really a sort of an urban collector. But much lower than that. I mean, residential streets are typically 25 miles an hour, but I don't think we'll ever get that on St. John just because the way it functions as a sort of a residential collector street. But like to your point, Maggie, I mean, I think we would definitely collect some data after the fact to make sure that these elements are being effective.
Thank you. One last question, and then it is almost 7, so we can kind of pivot and start closing. But Amanda was asking if temporary speed tables made of rubber were an option that we considered or an option that would work here.
We haven't really considered those, although we have considered them in other corridors. And we would want to, I think we'd maybe want to look into those a little bit and where they're placed. But I think in general, I mean, and if you can look at the corridor as a whole, we're not really proposing any vertical type barriers, if you will, like speed humps or things of that nature, because of the way the corridor is. It's still, like I said, a sort of a collector street, so that kind of a abrupt treatment may not be appropriate. But a table, a speed table might be an option. So we'll explore, and the difference between a speed table and a speed hump is just is just the length of it. How long a speed table is usually, I don't know, about 10 feet. A speed hump can only be about 4 feet. So, and it's a little bit, and the speed table can be a little bit not as high, like maybe 3 inches off the pavement, as opposed to a speed hump that might be 4 inches off the pavement, which you might not think makes a difference, but it makes a difference. So we'll explore some of those options and see if they're feasible for this corridor.
Mario, this is Christopher. I just wanted to add one thing because this was brought up at the last meeting, and I think one of the concerns with the rubber installations was the snowplow issue that we brought up, and so they tend to rip those things up. So that was one of the reasons another one of the reasons we steered away from those.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point. I mean, one consideration might be, again, if we're talking as far as measuring effectiveness, maybe they're deployed during the summertime when that's less of an issue, but does give us the opportunity to evaluate impact on speeding and traffic. And then when the winter season comes, and I want to let you all know that I did have the privilege of snow plowing your neighborhood this past winter, and you live on some narrow streets. I'll tell you that it was rough. But so yeah, I mean, once we get into the snow plowing season, we might remove them just so that our crews can have an easy time with snow removal, but also so that the equipment is protected from damage that might be caused by the snow plows.
Well, with that, I want to, Jim, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment. I wanted to commend the direction of this thinking and planning, in that it seems like there's a real effort to make sure there's bang for the dollar, that the money is used to actually solve the problem. And in terms of PIAC resources, the $500,000 is 1/8 of our in-district money for a year. And that's compared to about 170 applications. So for us to commit, and I know it's not a lot of money in terms of some perspectives, but from a PIAC perspective, it's a considerable investment, since again, it's 1/8 of our workable funds for the year 2019. And so, you know, and sometimes we see projects where things get added in and it makes it nicer, but it sometimes prices it out of a resolution, and then the money just sits there. So again, I just wanted to comment to make sure that you know that we appreciate the direction of the planning on this.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I don't know, Mario, Christopher, or Director Shaw, do any of you want to offer any parting words before we wrap up for the evening?
Maggie, I would just like to say, I appreciate the work that's been done on this. I agree with Jim's assessment in terms of the quality that this project is. It is maximizing every dollar on this project, and hat goes off to the team for putting together a great solution. It's a welcomed investment in the historic Northeast. It needs more investment than just this one corridor, of course. But my hat's off to the team, and we'll look forward to seeing this project get off the ground.
Yeah, I don't really have any other comments, and thank you, Director Shaw, for your comments. But I do want to thank the community for coming out tonight and participating in this meeting. The feedback is really important. And I think as we begin to finalize a report and incorporate all your feedback, and encourage you to share the information that you've heard tonight, and stay involved so that we can make sure that we deliver a project that's going to be accepted by the community.
And we will be sure again to post this meeting recording and of course the sort of the final report and next steps on the project webpage. So be sure to check back on for updates on that project, and feel free to reach out to Mario or myself if you have any questions or ideas, or need anything else in the meantime. But with that, I'm going to end our recording and just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
Everybody.